Cadet Marguerite Maggie Thornhill stood at rigid attention as Commander Vexler's 4 eyes scrutinized her from head to toe. His upper set of eyes narrowed while the lower pair widened, the Centauri equivalent of disappointment. Cadet Thornhill, you are 17 standard minutes late to formation. Explain yourself. The commander's voice resonated with the distinctive metallic timbre characteristic of his species. Sir, the artificial gravity in Sector 7 was recalibrated without notice. I was temporarily stuck to the ceiling, sir. A ripple of chittering laughter spread through the assembled alien cadets. Commander Vexler's skin flushed a deep purple. Silence. The Galactic Academy does not tolerate excuses, especially from, he paused, mandibles clicking together, Deathworlders. There it was, that word again, Deathworlder. As if being from Earth was some kind of cosmic character flaw. Maggie had heard it all before. Humans come from a Class 12 Deathworld where everything from the atmosphere to the microorganisms actively tries to kill you, where the planet's very rotation generates crushing gravity, where the native species evolved in such hostile conditions that they became, theoretically, the universe's most resilient sentience. Theoretically. In practice, Maggie was the shortest cadet in her class. Her skin lacked protective scales, her bones weren't reinforced with natural carbon fiber, and she couldn't photosynthesize, regrow limbs, or shoot poison darts from specialized glands. By galactic standards, she was practically made of wet tissue paper. 20 extra laps around the quantum track, Cadet Thornhill. Perhaps the increased cardiovascular activity will strengthen your embarrassingly fragile skeletal structure. Yes, sir. Thank you, sir, Maggie replied, ignoring the bemused trills from Cadet Grozik, whose silicon-based biology made him literally as hard as a rock. As Vexler dismissed the formation, Maggie caught the sympathetic gaze of Trill, a Medusian with flowing tentacle hair who served as the closest thing she had to a friend at the academy. Don't let him get to you, Trill whispered, her hair tentacles subtly forming the Medusian gesture for solidarity. He's still mad about that time his great-grandfather visited Earth for a diplomatic mission and was defeated by what your people call a house cat. It's fine, Maggie sighed. I'm used to it. Used to what? Being the only human in the most prestigious military academy in 7 galaxies, or being underestimated by everyone with more than one respiratory system. Maggie allowed herself a small smile. Both, I guess. The Academy's central atrium buzzed with activity as cadets from over 300 species hurried to their next assignments. A group of Arctuvian cadets slithered past, their scaled bodies rippling as they propelled themselves forward without limbs. A pair of gaseous nebulites drifted overhead, their consciousness contained in self-generated force fields that gave them roughly humanoid shapes. And then there was Maggie, 2 arms, 2 legs, 1 head, boringly bilateral, depressingly symmetrical, catastrophically vulnerable to, well, everything. Hey, did you hear? Trill's voice dropped to an excited whisper. The field training assignments were posted. Maggie's stomach did a little flip. Field training was the make-or-break moment for third-year cadets. Success meant advancement to officer candidacy. Failure meant recycling back to second year, or worse, expulsion. Let me guess, Maggie groaned. I've been assigned to catalog moss samples on some climate-controlled moon. Actually, Trill's tentacles curled with excitement. You're on the Nexus 9 expedition team. Maggie stopped dead in her tracks. That's impossible. Nexus 9 is a Class 10 environmental challenge. They'd never send a human there. Well, they did. You're on Team Delta with me, Grozik, and Lieutenant Pax from Faculty Supervision. Lieutenant Pax, the Vulcan drill instructor who said humans were an evolutionary joke. That's the one, Trill confirmed cheerfully. We ship out tomorrow at first light. Maggie's mind raced. Nexus 9 was a newly discovered planet with extreme biodiversity and several unclassified apex predator species. It was exactly the kind of assignment that could make a cadet's reputation or end their career, possibly along with their life. This has to be a mistake, Maggie muttered. A deep gravelly voice responded from behind her. I assure you, Cadet Thornhill, the Galactic Academy does not make mistakes. Maggie turned to find herself face to chest with the imposing form of Lieutenant Pax. The Vulcan officer stood over 7 feet tall, with crystalline features that caught the light in mesmerizing but intimidating patterns. Sir, Maggie saluted sharply. Team Delta will assemble at Docking Bay 17 at 0500 hours. Bring nothing but your standard field kit, and whatever primitive survival instincts your species has managed to retain. He paused, his crystalline face impossible to read. I must admit, I am curious to see how a Deathworlder performs under actual duress. Perhaps you will surprise us all, Cadet Thornhill. With that, He strode away, leaving Maggie and Trill staring after him. Well, Trill said, her tentacles forming a pattern that translated roughly to holy crap, at least he's giving you a chance to prove yourself. Maggie nodded slowly. Yeah, a chance to prove myself. On a planet full of unclassified apex predators, with teammates who think I'll shatter if someone sneezes in my direction. Look, on the bright side, Trill offered. If you die, they'll probably name a particularly pathetic species of fungus after you. Maggie punched her friend lightly on the arm. Thanks. That's very comforting. As they headed to the dormitory to prepare for tomorrow's mission, Maggie couldn't shake the feeling that this assignment was either going to be the opportunity of a lifetime, or the most spectacular mistake in Academy history. Either way, Nexus 9 was waiting, and Cadet Maggie Thornhill, fragile human Deathworlder, was about to show the galaxy what she was made of, even if it was just wet tissue paper. The Academy's transport shuttle hummed with the distinctive whine of quantum thrusters as it broke through Nexus 9's upper atmosphere. Maggie sat strapped into her crash harness, trying desperately not to vomit. Turns out that when your species evolved on a planet with consistent gravity and atmospheric pressure, sudden changes to both could be problematic. Are you melting, human? Grozek asked, his obsidian eyes glinting with what might have been concern but was probably mockery. The silicon-based cadet didn't even need a crash harness. His crystalline form simply fused temporarily with the seat. Humans don't melt, Maggie said through gritted teeth. We just sometimes redistribute our internal fluids during atmospheric entry. Lieutenant Pax turned from the pilot's chair. If Cadet Thornhill expels bodily fluids in this vessel, she will be cleaning it with her primitive tongue scraper. It's called a toothbrush, sir, Maggie managed. How fascinating that you require specialized tools to maintain basic oral hygiene, Pax noted with the detached interest of a scientist observing a particularly disappointing specimen. Vulcans simply shed our entire mouth lining quarterly. Trill, whose tentacle hair was currently wrapped protectively around her head to prevent whiplash, chimed in. Actually, sir, I find human adaptations quite remarkable. They compensate for physical limitations with extraordinary behavioral plasticity. Yes, Pax agreed. Like how they invented projectile weapons because their limbs are too feeble to tear enemies apart. Very adaptive. Maggie closed her eyes and focused on not becoming the first human to vomit on a Vulcan lieutenant. That would definitely make Academy history, but not in the way she hoped. The shuttle bucked and shuddered as it descended through thick cloud layers. Through the viewports, glimpses of Nexus 9 revealed a landscape that seemed to defy logic. Massive purple-hued forests stretched as far as the eye could see, interrupted occasionally by towering crystal formations that caught the light of the planet's twin suns. Nexus 9, Lieutenant Pax announced, discovered 18 standard months ago by a Zentari exploration vessel. Initial surveys suggest biodiversity exceeding that of 17,000 catalog planets combined. Our mission is simple: collect biological specimens, catalog new species, and assess potential for future research outposts. The shuttle touched down with a gentle thud in a small clearing. As the engines powered down, the sounds of Nexus 9 filtered through clicks, whistles, and low rumbling growls that made the hair on Maggie's arms stand on end. We will establish base camp here, Pax declared, unfolding his crystalline form to its full imposing height. Standard security protocols, sonic perimeter, atmospheric analyzers, and continuous bioscans. As they disembarked, Maggie felt the gravity of Nexus 9 pull at her limbs, about 1.2 times Earth normal, uncomfortable, but manageable. The air was thicker too, rich with unfamiliar scents that her human nose could only partially process. Cadet Thornhill, you will assist Cadet Grozek with perimeter setup. Cadet Trill, you will accompany me to collect initial specimens within a 1-kilometer radius. Maggie nodded, reaching for her field kit. As she did, a shadow passed overhead, something large, with multiple wings that blocked out the sunlight momentarily. Everyone froze. What was that? Trill whispered, her tentacles rigid with alarm. Likely an aerial predator, Pax said dismissively. Of no concern to our mission. Nexus 9 wildlife will naturally avoid sentient beings. Maggie wasn't so sure. On Earth, being sentient didn't stop you from becoming lunch for a hungry predator. But she kept that thought to herself as she helped Grozek unpack the sonic perimeter nodes. Human, Grozek rumbled as they worked. I have been studying your species. Maggie raised an eyebrow. Find anything interesting? Your bone density is laughable. Your dermal layer offers negligible protection. Your visual acuity is limited to a tiny portion of the electromagnetic spectrum. He paused, setting a perimeter node with precision. Yet somehow your species conquered your planet's apex predators. Maggie shrugged. We're stubborn. Stubbornness is not a biological advantage. Says who? Sometimes being too stubborn to die is the only advantage you need. Grozek made a sound like pebbles grinding together, his species' version of a contemplative hum. Perhaps, but on Nexus 9, survival requires more than stubbornness. It requires a piercing shriek cut through the air, followed by a crash from the direction Pax and Trill had gone. Without thinking, Maggie dropped the equipment and sprinted toward the sound. Wait, Grozek called after her. Running toward danger is precisely the irrational behavior that, but Maggie was already gone, her human legs pumping as she navigated the alien terrain. She found Trill backed against one of the crystal formations, her tentacles flattened against her head in a defensive posture. Lieutenant Pax stood a few meters away, a small handheld blaster pointed at something in the underbrush. Stay back, Cadet Thornhill, Pax ordered. The situation is under control. The underbrush rustled, and then parted to reveal a creature unlike anything Maggie had ever seen. It moved on 6 powerful limbs, each ending in curved talons the size of combat knives. Its body was covered in iridescent scales that shifted color as it moved, and its elongated head featured multiple rows of serrated teeth visible through partially open jaws. Classification unknown, Pax stated, his voice steady. Probable apex predator. Proceed with caution. The creature's head swiveled, taking in each of them in turn. When its gaze, 3 multifaceted eyes arranged in a triangle, landed on Maggie, something unexpected happened. It hesitated. Sir, Maggie whispered, I think it's silence. Cadet, Pax hissed. Your fragile human form is likely triggering its predatory instincts. But that wasn't it at all. The creature wasn't preparing to attack Maggie, it was backing away from her. Slowly, cautiously, as if she were the dangerous one. Pax and Trill exchanged confused glances. Fascinating, Trill murmured. It appears to perceive the human as a threat. Impossible, Pax declared. There must be another explanation. The creature continued its retreat, keeping its eyes fixed on Maggie until it disappeared back into the dense vegetation. Well, Maggie said into the stunned silence that followed, that was weird. Indeed, Pax agreed, studying Maggie with new interest. Perhaps there is more to Deathworlders than fragile bones and inefficient respiratory systems. Grozek finally caught up, his crystalline form glinting in the dappled sunlight. What happened? Did the human do something irrational again? Not exactly, Trill replied, her tentacles now relaxed and curling with excitement. She scared away an apex predator by standing still. Coincidence, Pax insisted, holstering his blaster. We will need more data before drawing conclusions. As they made their way back to the camp, Maggie couldn't shake the strange feeling that had come over her when the creature looked at her. It wasn't fear she had seen in those alien eyes. It was respect, or maybe just indigestion. Hard to tell with alien apex predators. Either way, their first day on Nexus 9 had just gotten a lot more interesting. And for once, being the weak, fragile human might not be the disadvantage everyone thought it was. By the 3rd day on Nexus 9, Team Delta had established a comfortable routine. Wake up, consume nutrition appropriate for their respective biologies, and spend the day cataloging the mind-boggling array of flora and fauna that made the planet a xenobiologist's dream, or nightmare, depending on how you felt about carnivorous pollen. Species designation NX-934, Trill dictated as her tentacles delicately manipulated a sample collection device. Appears to be a photosynthetic fungus with ambulatory capabilities and mild telepathic emissions. Maggie looked up from her own cataloging work. Wait, the mushroom can walk and read minds? Rudimentary movement and empathic sensing only, Trill clarified. It likely evolved to flee from predators and locate optimal light sources. On Earth, mushrooms just sit there and get eaten or picked. Maybe with the occasional hallucinogenic properties thrown in for fun. Lieutenant Pax approached, carrying a containment unit filled with what appeared to be sentient vines. Cadet Thornhill, your constant comparisons to Earth specimens are irrelevant and distracting. Just providing context, sir, Maggie replied, carefully placing her own sample, a beetle-like creature with translucent wings that hummed in perfect C-sharp into a stasis container. Context is unnecessary. Nexus 9 exists independent of your homeworld's evolutionary parameters. Pax paused, his crystalline features catching the light in a way that almost suggested thoughtfulness. Although I must admit, the incident with the apex predator yesterday remains curious. Since their first encounter with the 6-limbed creature, they had spotted 3 more distinct apex predator species. Each time the result was the same: initial aggression or curiosity, followed by unmistakable wariness once they noticed Maggie. Maybe I just have one of those faces, Maggie suggested. You know, the kind that says, don't eat me, I'll give you indigestion. Grozek, who had been silent for most of the morning, suddenly spoke up. I have been analyzing the behavioral patterns of Nexus 9 predators. They show normal aggression toward me, Trill, and Lieutenant Pax. Their avoidance behavior is specific to the human. Thanks for the scientific confirmation of my special charm, Maggie said dryly. It is not charm, Grozek continued, missing the sarcasm entirely. It may be chemical, biological, or perhaps, a thunderous roar interrupted his theory, so loud it seemed to vibrate the very air around them. The team froze. That, Pax said quietly, was not a sound we have catalogued yet. Trill's tentacles twitched nervously. Judging by acoustic properties, I estimate the source is very large and approximately 200 meters northeast of our position. We should return to base camp, Pax decided. The mission parameters do not require us to engage with every apex predator on this planet. For once, Maggie agreed with him completely, but before they could move, the forest canopy above them shuddered and parted as something massive descended from the trees. It was, without exaggeration, the most terrifying creature Maggie had ever seen. Standing nearly 5 meters tall on 4 trunk-like legs, its body was a nightmare amalgamation of Earth's most lethal predators, the armored hide of a rhinoceros, the agility of a big cat, and a head that featured both insectoid mandibles and reptilian fangs. Multiple eyes dotted its skull in no discernible pattern, and what looked like specialized sensory organs pulsed along its spine. Oh, Trill whispered, her voice tiny. That's big. Classification unknown, Pax stated, his voice betraying the slightest tremor. Definitive apex predator. Nobody move. The creature surveyed them with its numerous eyes, mandibles clicking in what might have been anticipation. It took a thunderous step forward, focusing first on Grozek. The silicon-based cadet stood perfectly still, his crystalline form glinting in the dappled sunlight. The predator snorted, a sound like boulders tumbling down a mountainside, then turned its attention to Trill. The Medusian's tentacles were flat against her head in abject terror. Next came Lieutenant Pax, who had drawn his blaster but held it at his side, clearly calculating whether a single weapon would be sufficient against such a behemoth. Finally, the creature's gaze fell on Maggie. She held her breath, wondering if whatever strange effect she had on the other predators would work on this living tank. For a terrifying moment, nothing happened. The creature leaned closer, its breath hot and fetid on Maggie's face. One of its sensory organs extended toward her, almost touching her skin. Then, something extraordinary happened. The creature reared back as if struck, its many eyes widened, and it emitted a high-pitched keening sound that was completely at odds with its massive size. It backpedaled so quickly it nearly toppled over, crashing into the underbrush with surprising desperation. And then, in a flurry of movement that shook the ground beneath their feet, the apex predator fled. The most dangerous creature they had encountered on Nexus 9 had just run away from Maggie Thornhill, the fragile human. Silence fell over Team Delta. Even the ambient noises of the forest seemed muted, as if the entire ecosystem was holding its breath. That, Pax finally said, was not coincidence. Holy gelatinous formation, Trill breathed, her tentacles now animated with excitement. Maggie, you scared it. You actually scared the biggest, baddest thing we've seen on this whole planet. Grozek moved closer to Maggie, studying her with new intensity. The human shows no obvious defensive adaptations, no venomous appendages, no armored exoskeleton, no energy discharge capabilities. Thanks for the vote of confidence, Maggie muttered. Yet, Grozek continued, as if she hadn't spoken, apex predators perceive you as a threat. Most fascinating, Lieutenant Pax holstered his weapon and pulled out his scientific scanner, pointing it directly at Maggie. Cadet Thornhill, remain still while I analyze your biochemistry. The scanner hummed and beeped, its holographic display showing readouts that meant nothing to Maggie but caused Pax's crystalline features to shift in what might have been surprise. Interesting, he said. Your endocrine system is producing high levels of what your species calls adrenaline and cortisol, stress hormones, correct? Well, yeah, Maggie admitted. Being face-to-face with a 5-meter-tall death machine tends to stress me out. Sue me. These compounds are unique to Earth mammals, Pax continued, and they are being released through your skin in trace amounts. Trill moved closer, her scientific curiosity overcoming her recent terror. Lieutenant, are you suggesting that Maggie's stress sweat is scaring apex predators? Put that way, it sounded ridiculous. Maggie almost laughed, but the serious expressions on her teammates' faces stopped her. That's impossible, she protested. Earth predators don't run from humans because we're sweaty. If anything, they can smell fear. She stopped abruptly as realization dawned. They can smell fear, she repeated slowly. On Earth, predators evolved alongside prey that release stress hormones when in danger. They learned to associate those chemical signals with something dangerous enough to frighten their prey. Pax finished, his voice uncharacteristically impressed. An evolutionary response. Nexus 9's apex predators have never encountered a species that produces these particular compounds, so they think whatever makes that smell must be an even bigger threat than they are. Trill concluded, her tentacles forming the Medusian expression for amazement. Maggie, your stress sweat is the ultimate predator repellent. Grozik made his pebble-grinding sound again. The Deathworld human's defensive adaptation is fear itself. Elegant in its simplicity, Maggie didn't know whether to laugh or cry. After all the teasing about her fragile human body, after all the jokes about Earth being a Deathworld that somehow produced the galaxy's weakest sentient species, her greatest asset turned out to be her sweat glands. So, she said, carefully, what you're saying is, the more terrified I am, the safer we all are. Lieutenant Pax nodded solemnly. It appears so, Cadet Thornhill. Your fear is our greatest weapon on this planet. Maggie looked around at her teammates, the silicon-based rockman, the tentacle-haired empath, and the crystalline officer, all staring at her with new respect. Well, she said, with a wry smile, that's not exactly how I planned to prove humans are valuable team members, but I'll take it. As they made their way back to camp, Maggie couldn't help but wonder what other surprises her supposedly inferior human biology might hold. For the first time since arriving at the Galactic Academy, being a Deathworlder felt like something to be proud of, even if that pride came with really sweaty palms. News traveled fast at base camp. By evening meal, Maggie had gone from fragile human liability to walking apex predator repellent. She wasn't sure which was worse. So Trill said between bites of a nutrient gel that pulsed with an unnervingly familiar heartbeat, we should revise our field strategy. Maggie takes point on all expeditions. Lieutenant Pax, who didn't eat so much as absorb ambient energy through his crystalline matrix, gave what passed for a nod. Logical. Cadet Thornhill's unique biochemistry provides tactical advantages we would be foolish to ignore. I don't know if I like being the team's designated panic button, Maggie grumbled, poking at her field rations, a sad approximation of chicken and rice that tasted predominantly of neither. Would you prefer to be emergency rations instead? Grozik asked with genuine curiosity, because without your stress hormones, that was the statistical probability of your role on this mission. Maggie choked on her not chicken. Thanks for the vote of confidence. You misunderstand, Grozik continued. It is not a criticism, it is an acknowledgement of evolutionary probability. On Nexus 9, a silicon-based lifeform like myself has natural advantages, physical durability, resistance to temperature extremes, no need for constant organic fuel. He gestured to Trill. Medusians possess sensory tentacles capable of detecting electrical impulses and chemical signals from 50 meters away. His obsidian gaze shifted to Pax. Vulcans have crystalline structures capable of focusing ambient energy into defensive capabilities. Finally, he looked at Maggie. Humans have soft exteriors, minimal sensory range, and require constant maintenance. Yet here you are, the only one of us capable of deterring apex predators through biological means alone. Fascinating. When you put it that way, it almost sounds like a compliment, Maggie said. It is a scientific observation, Grozik replied. But yes, in my culture, acknowledging another's survival adaptations is considered high praise. Lieutenant Pax activated a holographic display at the center of their table. I have been analyzing our findings. Cadet Thornhill's effect on Nexus 9's predatory species raises intriguing questions about evolutionary biology across planetary systems. The display showed a series of chemical formulas that Maggie vaguely recognized from her xenobiology courses. Earth mammals evolved alongside predators for millions of years, Pax continued. Your adrenal system produces compounds that served as warning signals, chemical messages that essentially broadcast danger here to other creatures. But on Earth, predators use those signals to find prey, Maggie pointed out. They smell fear and attack, not run away. Precisely, Pax said, his voice taking on the tone of an instructor. Because Earth predators evolved alongside these signals, they learned to associate them with vulnerable prey. Trill's tentacles formed an excited pattern, but on Nexus 9, predators have never encountered these specific chemical compounds before. Correct, Pax confirmed. And here is where it gets interesting. My analysis suggests that something on Nexus 9, perhaps a now extinct apex species or even a plant, must have produced similar compounds as a defense mechanism or warning. The holographic display shifted to show various predator species they'd encountered. with highlighted areas indicating sensory organs. These predators have highly specialized chemoreceptors, Pax explained, far more sensitive than anything found in Earth's evolutionary record. They're specifically attuned to detect certain chemical signatures remarkably similar to human adrenaline and cortisol. So when they smell me being terrified, they think I'm something that eats things like them for breakfast, Maggie said slowly. In essence, yes, Pax agreed. Your fear response mimics the warning signal of something they have evolved to flee from. Grozik made his contemplative pebble-grinding sound. The universe is elegantly ironic. The human's greatest weakness, her fragility and resulting fear response, becomes her greatest strength. Hey, Maggie protested. I wouldn't call fear my greatest weakness. What would you call it? Trill asked gently. Maggie thought for a moment. A reasonable response to danger. A survival mechanism. I mean, fear kept our species alive long enough to develop tools and technology. Being afraid of things that can kill you isn't a weakness. It's common sense. Lieutenant Pax studied her with newfound interest. Perhaps therein lies the true advantage of Deathworlders. You evolved not just physical adaptations, but psychological ones. Your species recognized its vulnerability and compensated through heightened threat awareness and technological innovation. We're not fearless, Maggie agreed. We're just really good at being scared and doing stuff anyway. An interesting philosophy, Pax mused. At the academy, cadets are trained to suppress fear, to view it as counterproductive to efficient function. Where I come from, courage isn't about not feeling fear, Maggie said. It's about feeling it and moving forward regardless. A respectful silence fell over the table. For the first time since joining the academy, Maggie felt like her teammates were seeing her, really seeing her, not just as a fragile human but as a cadet with something valuable to contribute. The moment was broken by a sharp beeping from their perimeter alert system. Proximity warning, Pax announced, rising smoothly to his feet. Something large has breached the outer sensor ring. The team moved quickly to defensive positions, gathering data sensors and weapons. Through the transparent walls of their shelter, they could see movement in the darkening forest, multiple large shapes circling the camp. I count 6 distinct life forms, Trill reported, her tentacles extended to maximize sensory input. All apex predator class, different species, but moving together. That's unusual. Most unusual, Pax agreed. Apex predators rarely cooperate across species lines, unless they share a common goal, Grozik added ominously. As if on cue, one of the creatures emerged from the tree line, a massive serpentine form with multiple heads, each featuring a distinct set of sensory organs. It was followed by a low-slung predator with blade-like appendages, and what appeared to be bioluminescent hunting nodes along its spine. More creatures joined them, forming a loose semicircle around the camp's perimeter. Despite their diverse morphologies, they all shared one common behavior. They kept their distance from the shelter, specifically from the side where Maggie stood watching. They're hunting us, Maggie realized. But they're afraid to get too close because of me. That is my assessment as well, Pax confirmed. However, their coordinated behavior suggests a level of intelligence we had not anticipated. They appear to be studying us, or waiting us out, Trill suggested nervously. We can't stay in this shelter forever. Grozik moved to stand beside Maggie. The sonic perimeter will hold them at bay temporarily. But if they are indeed cooperating and learning, they may eventually overcome their instinctive aversion to the human's chemical signature. Lieutenant Pax checked the power levels on his blaster. We must consider the possibility that we are witnessing adaptive behavior in real time. These creatures may be evolving strategies to counter the human's biochemical advantage. A chill ran down Maggie's spine that had nothing to do with Nexus 9's dropping nighttime temperature. You're saying they're figuring out that I'm not actually dangerous, just smelly. I am saying, Pax replied gravely, that intelligence often overrides instinct, given sufficient motivation. Outside, one of the predators, a quadrupedal beast, with what looked like naturally evolved armor plating, nudged forward cautiously, testing the boundaries of its own fear response. Guys, Maggie said, I think we need a new plan, one that doesn't rely entirely on my stress sweat as our first line of defense. Trill's tentacles twisted in the Medusian equivalent of a wry smile. Well, we could always try making you more stressed. Maybe Grozik could tell you about his species' reproduction process. It involves molten rock and sound frequencies that liquefy most organic material. Not helping, Maggie muttered. Lieutenant Pax was scanning the creatures with increasing concern. Their biochemical readings are fluctuating. They appear to be producing counteracting hormones, essentially chemically overriding their own fear responses. Oh, perfect, Maggie groaned. The one time my humanity is actually useful, and the monsters are developing immunity. Adaptation, Grozik corrected. It is the universal constant. No advantage remains absolute forever. As they watched, the armored quadruped took another step forward, then another. Its many eyes remained fixed on Maggie, but the fear response was visibly diminishing. It appears, Pax said quietly, that our discovery about Deathworlders may be short-lived. Maggie stared back at the approaching predator, her mind racing. If fear was no longer enough to keep these creatures at bay, what options did they have? Their weapons might take down one or two, but not a coordinated pack. The shuttle was on the other side of the clearing, and even if they reached it, the startup sequence would leave them vulnerable. Then an idea struck her, so simple yet so perfectly aligned with everything they'd learned about Nexus 9's apex predators. Lieutenant, she said slowly, you said these predators evolved to recognize certain chemical signatures as warnings, right? Signals that basically say something more dangerous than you is here's. Correct, Pax confirmed. And my stress hormones happen to mimic those signatures by pure coincidence. Also correct. Maggie turned to face her teammates, a slow smile spreading across her face. Then maybe we need to stop relying on coincidence, and start being deliberately terrifying. I don't follow your reasoning, Cadet, Pax admitted. What's the one thing humans have that no other species on Nexus 9 developed? Maggie asked. When no one answered immediately, she continued, imagination. We don't just respond to threats, we anticipate them. We don't just feel fear, we understand it. And most importantly, we know how to cause it. She looked back at the predators, who were growing bolder by the minute. These creatures evolved to recognize chemical warnings, Maggie said. But what if we create new warnings they've never encountered before? What if we show them that humans aren't just accidentally scary, we're scary on purpose? For the first time since she'd met him, Lieutenant Pax looked genuinely impressed. You are suggesting psychological warfare against apex predators. I'm suggesting, Maggie replied with growing confidence, that it's time to show these creatures exactly why Earth is classified as a death world. As night fell completely over Nexus 9, the team huddled together, finalizing their plan. Outside, the predators continued their patient vigil, unaware that inside the shelter, a supposedly fragile human was about to teach them the true meaning of fear. This plan is statistically improbable, Grozik rumbled as he positioned himself near the shelter's exit. Most human plans are, Maggie admitted, rummaging through her field kit. That's kind of our specialty. Lieutenant Pax checked the power levels on the portable shield generators they'd set up. Cadet Thornhill, I must register my formal concerns about this strategy. The Academy protocol clearly states that in situations of extreme danger, preservation of the team takes precedence over experimental tactics. With all due respect, sir, Maggie replied, Academy protocol was written by species who've never had to talk their way out of being eaten by a bear. What is a bear? Trill asked, her tentacles preoccupied with modifying their atmospheric sampling equipment. Imagine Grozik, but fuzzy, angry, and with better dental work, Maggie said. The point is, humans have millennia of experience, scaring off things that want to eat us. It's practically our cultural heritage. Outside, the predators were growing bolder. The sonic perimeter was still active, but 3 of the creatures had already breached its outer boundary, their sensory organs adapting to the discomfort. The armored quadruped was now less than 20 meters from the shelter, its multiple eyes fixed on Maggie with diminishing apprehension. They're learning, Pax observed. Their neurochemical responses are stabilizing. Then we'd better hurry, Maggie said. She laid out the items she'd gathered: emergency flares, sample collection canisters, her multi-tool, pieces of reflective thermal sheeting, and various bits of equipment that could be repurposed. Okay, everyone has their assignments. Let's do this before our friends out there decide we're back on the menu. Trill connected the last wire to their juried device. Atmospheric dispersal unit ready. But Maggie, I still don't understand how this will help. Trust me, Maggie said with more confidence than she felt. Earth predators are hardwired to fear certain things: fire, loud noises, sudden movements, unfamiliar smells. If Nexus 9's apex predators have similar instincts, we're about to trigger every single one of them. Lieutenant Pax positioned himself by the main control panel. On your signal, Cadet. Maggie took a deep breath. 3, 2, 1, now. The shelter's external lights shut off, plunging the clearing into near-total darkness. In the same instant, Trill activated the atmospheric dispersal unit, sending a cloud of mixed chemical compounds billowing outward, a cocktail that included synthetic versions of Earth predator-marking pheromones, combined with samples from every toxic plant they'd cataloged on Nexus 9. The effect was immediate. The assembled predators shifted uneasily, their sensory organs working overtime to process the unfamiliar chemical assault. But they didn't retreat. Phase 2, Maggie called. Grozek activated the modified shield generators. Instead of creating a continuous protective barrier, they now pulsed at irregular intervals, sending waves of disruptive energy across the clearing. The energy itself was harmless, barely enough to cause static, but the visual effect was dramatic, concentric rings of blue-white light rippling outward like shockwaves. Several of the predators backed up, clearly unsettled by the display, but the armored quadruped held its ground, joined now by the serpentine multi-headed creature. They're still adapting, Pax reported. Brain activity suggests heightened alertness, but diminishing fear response. Then it's time for the main event, Maggie said. She nodded to Trill, who handed her what looked like a makeshift backpack constructed from sampling equipment and thermal sheeting. Are you certain about this part of the plan? Pax asked, his crystalline features set in an expression that might have been concern. Absolutely not, Maggie admitted cheerfully. But that's the thing about humans, Lieutenant. Our best plans often look completely insane to everyone else. With that, she secured the contraption to her back and grabbed the remaining equipment. On my mark, open the door, then get ready with the flares and the sonic amplifiers. Maggie took another deep breath, felt the familiar rush of adrenaline, the very chemical that had started this whole bizarre situation, and nodded firmly. Now, the shelter door slid open. Instead of cowering inside, Maggie charged out into the clearing with a primal shout that would have made her ancient human ancestors proud. Behind her, Trill launched flares that arced high into the night sky, bathing the clearing in harsh, unnatural red light. The predators recoiled in surprise at this unexpected behavior. Prey was not supposed to run toward danger. Prey was not supposed to create light where darkness provided hunting advantage. But Maggie was just getting started. She triggered the device on her back, and the jury-rigged thermal sheets unfurled with a dramatic snap, extending outward and upward to create the illusion that her human silhouette had suddenly doubled in size. Reflective strips caught the flare light, making the entire apparatus appear to glow with internal energy. Simultaneously, Grozek activated the sonic amplifiers, which broadcast a modified version of the largest apex predator's own roar, but at 3 times the volume, and a frequency specifically calibrated to target their sensory organs. The effect was cacophonous and disorienting. The predator's coordinated formation broke as several backed away in confusion. But the armored quadruped and the multi-headed serpent held their ground, their evolutionary drive to hunt warring with new signals they couldn't properly interpret. They're confused but not retreating, Trill called from the shelter doorway. Time for the finale, Maggie shouted back. She pulled out her multi-tool and struck it against a piece of containment metal, creating sparks that ignited the special mixture she'd prepared from hydrogen-rich plant samples. The result was a controlled but impressive gout of flame that shot forward from her hand like a miniature flamethrower. Fire, the universal language of stay back or get burned. The armored quadruped finally began to retreat, its instinctive fear of flame overriding its predatory programming. But the serpentine creature, apparently less concerned with heat damage, continued its approach, multiple heads weaving hypnotically as it slithered closer. Cadet Thornhill, Pax called in warning. I see it, Maggie replied, trying to keep her voice steady despite the terror coursing through her veins. The irony wasn't lost on her. The more frightened she became, the more her body produced the very chemicals that had originally kept these creatures at bay. We need something else, something specific to this species. Trill's tentacles whipped through data readings. Its sensory nodes are primarily receptive to electrical signals and vibration patterns. Electrical, that's it. Maggie turned to Pax. Lieutenant, can your crystalline structure generate an electrical discharge? Affirmative, Pax confirmed. But at a range that would require close proximity. Perfect. Maggie gestured him forward. Get ready. Grozek, I need you to cause a ground tremor. Nothing that will damage the camp, just enough to disrupt its vibration sensing. That is within my capabilities, Grozek acknowledged, moving to position. Maggie faced the approaching serpent, flame device still extended. When I say now, Pax will discharge, Grozek will create the tremor, and I'll push forward with the flame. Ready? The serpentine creature was now less than 10 meters away, its head swaying in different patterns, as if trying to decide which part of Maggie to consume first. Now, three things happened simultaneously. Lieutenant Pax released a crackling burst of electrical energy that illuminated the clearing with spiderwebs of blue light. Grozek slammed his crystalline form into the ground, creating a localized shockwave that rippled outward, and Maggie charged forward with her flame device, letting out the most ferocious battle cry she could muster. The combined sensory assault was too much even for the adaptive apex predator. The serpentine creature recoiled violently, its multiple heads thrashing in confusion and alarm. It retreated with remarkable speed, followed by the remaining predators who had been watching from the perimeter. Within moments, the clearing was empty except for Team Delta. Maggie stood in stunned silence, the flame device sputtering out in her hand. She turned to her teammates, who were staring at her with expressions ranging from shock, Trill to scientific fascination, Grozek to what might have been grudging respect. Pax, well, she said finally, collapsing the thermal sheet apparatus on her back. That was terrifying, but effective, Pax noted, approaching to help her disconnect the contraption. Your strategy exploited fundamental survival instincts that transcend planetary evolution. As I said, Grozek added, humans compensate for physical limitations with behavioral adaptations. In this case, psychological warfare against creatures many times your size and strength. Trill bounded forward, her tentacles practically vibrating with excitement. That was amazing. You didn't just rely on your natural chemical deterrent, you created an entirely new set of threats. Fire, noise, visual illusions. The predators couldn't process so many danger signals at once. Maggie couldn't help but smile. Like I said, humans have been scaring off apex predators since before we invented the wheel. We're pretty good at it by now. Lieutenant Pax was studying his scanner readings with interest. Most fascinating, when you engaged in your display, your adrenaline and cortisol levels spiked significantly. The predators received both your artificial threats and an amplified version of the chemical signals that initially deterred them. So being scared made me scarier. Maggie laughed. That's the most human thing I've ever heard. As they collected their modified equipment and headed back to the shelter, Maggie felt a strange sense of pride. For the first time since arriving at the academy, she didn't feel like the fragile human Deathworlder trying to keep up with naturally superior alien species. She felt like a cadet who had brought unique and valuable skills to her team. You know, Trill said as they secured the shelter door, I think I finally understand why Earth is classified as a Deathworld despite humans seeming so physically vulnerable. Maggie raised an eyebrow. It's not because everything on your planet evolved to kill you, Trill explained, her tentacles forming a pattern of sincere admiration. It's because you evolved to be really good at not dying. Lieutenant Pax was recalibrating the perimeter defenses. An accurate assessment. Deathworlder status is not merely about surviving harsh conditions, it is about thriving despite them. About turning disadvantages into tactical advantages. About being scared but doing stuff anyway, Maggie said, echoing her earlier words. Indeed, Pax agreed. A philosophy that, I must acknowledge, has considerable merit. As Team Delta settled in for what they hoped would be an uneventful night, Maggie couldn't help but wonder how the Academy would react to their mission report. Somehow, she doubted scared off apex predators with stress, sweat and psychological warfare was a standard entry in the field training evaluation form. But then again, nothing about being the only human cadet at the Galactic Academy had ever been standard. And for the first time, Maggie was perfectly okay with that. The return journey to the Galactic Academy was considerably less eventful than their time on Nexus 9. No one vomited, no one fused with their seat, and the conversation flowed with an ease that would have been unimaginable just 1 week earlier. I still can't believe Commander Vexelor's face when he read our mission report, Trill said, her tentacles curling with amusement, all four of his eyes blinking out of sync. The commander does not appreciate creative problem solving, Lieutenant Pax noted, piloting the shuttle with precise crystalline fingers. He prefers solutions found in the Academy manual. Was there a chapter on how to repel apex predators using human stress, sweat and improvised flame devices that I missed during orientation? Maggie asked innocently. Even Grozek made his grinding pebble laugh. The Xenobiology department has requested tissue samples from Cadet Thornhill. They wish to synthesize human stress hormones for further study. Great, Maggie sighed. I've gone from being the fragile human to being the Academy's sweaty science experiment. You have also gone, Pax pointed out, from being considered a liability to being recognized as an asset with unique tactical capabilities. That was true enough. When they'd first transmitted their preliminary findings, the Academy's response had been skeptical, but the comprehensive data they'd collected, plus the visual recordings of apex predators fleeing from a human cadet half their size, had sparked a flurry of activity among the scientific and military divisions alike. The Academy's observation dome came into view, its crystalline surface reflecting the light of the system's twin suns. After docking procedures and decontamination, always an awkward process when team members included both gaseous and solid states of matter, Team Delta was immediately summoned to the command center. Commander Vexillor awaited them, flanked by representatives from the xenobiology, military strategy, and diplomatic corps departments. Team Delta, he acknowledged, all four eyes focused on them with an intensity Maggie found unnerving. Your mission to Nexus 9 has produced unexpected results. Thank you, sir, Maggie replied automatically, then added, I think. One of the xenobiologists stepped forward, a Florian whose plant-based neural network allowed for exceptional pattern recognition. Cadet Thornhill, your discovery regarding human stress hormones and their effect on Nexus 9 predators is remarkable. It suggests possibilities for non-lethal deterrent technologies that could revolutionize planetary exploration. All I did was get really scared, sir, Maggie said. It's kind of a human specialty. Do not undervalue your contribution, Cadet, the Florian continued. Your team's innovative response to the coordinated predator attack demonstrates an adaptive problem-solving approach we rarely see in field operations. Commander Vexillor's mandibles clicked together, a sound Maggie had learned to interpret as reluctant agreement. Lieutenant Pax speaks highly of your performance, Cadet Thornhill, as does the rest of Team Delta. It seems I may have underestimated the practical applications of Deathworld evolutionary traits. Coming from Vexillor, this was practically a standing ovation. The Academy Council has reviewed your mission data, he continued, and has made two significant decisions. First, Team Delta will receive commendations for exceptional field performance and scientific discovery. Trill's tentacles formed a pattern of celebration so enthusiastic that one of them accidentally smacked Grozek in the face. It made a sound like a pebble hitting a window. Second, Vexillor continued, we are establishing a new research initiative focused on Deathworld adaptations and their applications in galactic defense and exploration. Cadet Thornhill, upon graduation, you will be offered a position as the initiative's human liaison. Maggie blinked, certain she'd misheard. Sir, you have demonstrated that Deathworlders possess unique capabilities valuable to the Galactic Alliance, Vexillor explained. We intend to recruit more humans to the Academy, and you will help develop training protocols that capitalize on your species' distinctive attributes. You want me to teach aliens how to use fear as a weapon? Maggie asked, trying to keep the amusement out of her voice. We want you to share Deathworld survival strategies with species that evolved in less challenging environments, the military strategist clarified. Your approach to the Nexus 9 Predator crisis demonstrated tactical thinking that would not have occurred to non-Deathworld species. Lieutenant Pax stepped forward. If I may, Commander, Team Delta's success was not due solely to Cadet Thornhill's Deathworld biology. It was the combination of our diverse evolutionary advantages, my energy manipulation, Cadet Grozek's silicon-based durability, Cadet Trill's sensory perception, and Cadet Thornhill's psychological adaptation to threat response. A fair assessment, Vexillor acknowledged. Which is why Team Delta will continue to work together for your final Academy year, focusing on integrating these diverse capabilities into unified field protocols. Maggie exchanged surprised glances with her teammates. Being asked to continue working together was an honor usually reserved for the top-performing teams, those expected to receive prestigious assignments upon graduation. Dismissed, Vexillor concluded. Report to medical for standard post-mission evaluation, then take 48 hours for recovery before returning to regular Academy schedule. As they exited the command center, Trill could no longer contain her excitement. Did that just happen? Did we just get commendations and a guaranteed team assignment for next year? Affirmative, Grozek confirmed. Although I am uncertain why this surprises you, our mission performance was exceptional. The last time I checked, Maggie said, the betting pool had 3-to-1 odds that I wouldn't survive the first day on Nexus 9. Those odds were statistically unsound, Grozek stated. I placed my wager on your survival and our mission success. Maggie stopped walking. You bet on me. Of course, Grozek said, as if it were obvious. Silicon-based lifeforms are excellent at calculating probability. Humans have survived on a Class 12 Deathworld for millennia, despite your physical limitations. The evidence suggested you possessed compensatory advantages that would become apparent under sufficient pressure. Grozek, Maggie said slowly. That might be the nicest thing anyone at the academy has ever said to me. The silicon-based cadet seemed confused. I stated a mathematical conclusion, not a compliment. For a human, Trill explained, those can be the same thing. Lieutenant Pax, who had been silently accompanying them, finally spoke. Cadet Thornhill, I owe you an apology. When you were assigned to Team Delta, I believed your presence would endanger the mission. I was incorrect. Apology accepted, sir, Maggie said, genuinely touched. Although to be fair, my run toward danger while on fire strategy wasn't exactly by the book. Perhaps Pax suggested, the book needs revision. 3 weeks later, life at the Galactic Academy had settled back into its routine, or as routine as things could be when you were suddenly the center of scientific fascination. Maggie had grown accustomed to xenobiologists stopping her in hallways to ask about human fear responses, and military instructors incorporating her Nexus 9 tactics into their lesson plans. The most surprising change, however, was in how other cadets treated her. Where once they had seen only a fragile human from a Deathworld, they now saw a cadet who had faced down apex predators with nothing but sweat glands and improvised pyrotechnics. Cadet Thornhill, a voice called as Maggie crossed the academy's central atrium. She turned to see Commander Vexillor approaching, accompanied by a nervous-looking human female in civilian clothing. Sir, Maggie saluted sharply. This is Dr. Elena Reyes from Earth Space Academy, Vexillor introduced. She has arrived to discuss our new Deathworlder initiative. I thought you might show her around while explaining your experiences. Of course, sir, Maggie agreed, noting with amusement how the commander's mandibles were carefully arranged in a neutral position, rather than their usual disapproving click. As Vexillor departed, Dr. Reyes extended her hand in the human greeting gesture. Cadet Thornhill, it's a pleasure to meet you. Your mission report was quite something. Maggie shook her hand, grinning. Let me guess. The part where I strapped modified thermal sheets to my back and ran at apex predators with a homemade flamethrower raised some eyebrows. That and the part where you weaponized your own fear response, Dr. Reyes admitted. Earth's diplomatic corps is both impressed and slightly concerned about how this might affect human-alien relations moving forward. Well, if it helps, Maggie offered. My team now thinks humans are less physically pathetic and more psychologically terrifying. I'm not sure if that's progress. Dr. Reyes laughed. The Galactic Alliance has always valued humans for our adaptability and technological innovation. But your discovery about our stress hormones has opened up new possibilities for non-lethal defense mechanisms. They walked through the atrium, passing clusters of cadets from across the galaxy. Maggie noticed how many of them nodded respectfully in her direction. A far cry from the dismissive attitudes she'd faced before Nexus 9. You know, Maggie said thoughtfully, when I first came to the academy, I was so focused on proving I wasn't weak that I missed the point entirely. Which is? Dr. Reyes asked. Being from a Deathworld doesn't make you inherently strong or weak. It just means you've evolved different survival strategies. Maggie paused as a group of gaseous nebulites drifted by, their consciousness fields flickering in what she now recognized as a greeting pattern. Humans aren't impressive because we're tough. We're impressive because we're soft, fragile creatures who've figured out how to survive anyway. Dr. Reyes smiled. That's a profound insight, Cadet, and exactly the kind of perspective we need for this initiative. As they continued the tour, Maggie spotted Trill, Grozik and Lieutenant Pax waiting by the quantum physics lab. Trill waved enthusiastically with both her hands and several tentacles. Those are my teammates, Maggie explained. We're working on a joint research project combining our species' unique advantages. I'd love to meet them, Dr. Reyes said. As they approached, Maggie felt a sense of pride she'd never experienced before coming to the academy. She was still the only human cadet, still from a Deathworld, still physically weaker than most of her peers. But now she understood something fundamental in the grand galactic scheme. Every species was a specialist in something. Vulcans had their crystalline energy manipulation. Medusians had their sensory perception. Silicon-based lifeforms had their physical durability. And humans had fear, not just the ability to feel it, but the courage to face it, the ingenuity to use it, and the wisdom to learn from it. As Cadet Maggie Thornhill introduced Earth's representative to her alien teammates, she couldn't help but smile at the irony. She had traveled across the galaxy to prove humans weren't weak, only to discover that their greatest strength lay in the very things she'd been trying to hide, their vulnerability, their emotions and their remarkable ability to turn disadvantages into weapons. Not bad for a cadet from a Deathworld who just happened to have really effective stress sweat.